It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And in today's episode, we are looking at the pay-per-view estimates posted by the Wrestling Observer. We're looking at UFC antitrust updates. We're looking at new information about why the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act passed the House so quickly and easily. We also discuss MVP's latest moves in MMA, ONE's newest infusion of cash, PFL's chances of survival, and GFL's latest attempts to get their promotion off the ground. But before we get into all of that, we would advise you to please pick up a paid subscription so that you have access to everything. Now, we know that you just got a free episode, and it was a good one too, because you got John's interview with John Fitch, UFC litigant to one of the antitrust cases. So the next ones are not going to be free because we only give away our interviews. So if you want to be able to listen to today's whole show, you need to subscribe with your money. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Fairly good. A little beat. I had the vote last week in Congress took a lot out of me because, I wrote an article that came out and on Crown. We talked about it, did the interview with Fitch, did a few interviews on other shows. I really dropped the ball on our friends at Post Wrestling, John Pollock and them. I was supposed to go on their show, and man, did I F that up and miss out on going on their show because I'm going to blame the internet for effing up my brain that I cannot read time anymore.
Well, I'm sure that they'll reschedule you in.
Yeah, I feel really bad because it's first work was busy, so it took me away. But the other part was I looked at the time I was supposed to be on, and for some reason I saw that East Coast time, and I thought, oh, I got several hours still. So I just spaced on this whole thing. I had made plans to be on it, and I effed up. So I feel really bad for those guys because I told them repeatedly that I was going to be there and be on, and then I effed up. So blaming work, going to blame my job.
Well, like I say, I look forward to seeing you on there at some point here in the near future. I am sure they understand. So what do we got today? Because, longtime listeners already recognize that the very first question is going to be about the UFC antitrust cases. Do we have updates?
We do. There is some new filings in the UFC antitrust case. There was a joint status report filed last week on March 26th for all the cases. Again, if you're a new listener, there are 3 current potential class actions, complaints that were filed seeking class action status, all of them antitrust cases against the UFC, aka Zuffa, aka, parent company TKO Holdings. And those 3 cases are Johnson v. Zuffa, Serkinov v. Zuffa, and Davis v. Zuffa. And so these status reports, they're filed by both the plaintiffs, which are the fighters, and the UFC Endeavor, the defendants in the case. And this is where the fighters allege, obviously, that the UFC illegally suppressed their pay. And so what these joint status reports are is they offer a position on the searches. The report updates the court on the current disputes over discovery search terms. So the plaintiff's position, that is the fighters say they've spent 4 months narrowing their search term proposals. They went through 3 rounds of cuts, and they've reduced the documents that they're seeking from just under 10 million to 5 million, basically a 50% reduction. And they've organized it into terms to target, the custodian groups like Dana White, Hunter Campbell, Ari Emanuel, to focus search on the most relevant people, which includes fighters and such. They argue the defendants have been uncooperative, only providing hit reports without substantive engagements, and that the defendants' last-minute counterproposal improperly guts key terms without justification, according to them. So then the defendant's position, and the defendants again, is the UFC Endeavor / TKO. It's all the same. Zuffa. They argue 5 million documents is still wildly excessive and disproportionate. They point to specific problematic terms. That exclusive, which is one of the search term, alone hits 251,000 documents, and that the common names like Jones, Hernandez, and Ali together hit over 600,000 documents. And now I wonder who is Ali that they could be possibly searching for in the documents by the plaintiffs. And they say the plaintiffs have only meaningfully revised fewer than 10 terms throughout the whole negotiation. So on March 23rd last week, the defendants offered their own counterproposal that would reduce the document pool to about 1.3 million. But the plaintiffs, they have not engaged with this yet. So both sides are at an impasse right now over e-discovery search terms, and they're asking the court to weigh in. The core tension is a classic discovery fight. Plaintiffs want broad search to find evidence of wrongdoing, and the defendants say it's a fishing expedition that would cost them enormous time and money to review. And it's also worth noting who is in those search terms, because as we glance through them, we notice a few familiar names. I'm sure people are not surprised that McGregor's in there. The name Connor's in there, the name, GSP, various versions of GSP, George St. Pierre, George with properly spelled with an S, St. Pierre, Jones, John Jones, just long list of names. But also in there is Bloody Elbow and bloodyelbow.com. Nash, my name shows up in the Bloody Elbow section. So I assume they're talking about me. Wilcox shows up. And then Vic plus you show up. So there's several of us in the Bloody Elbow category that
Obviously,
made it. So,
it's because I'm linked to you.
Well, I don't know about that. It says Vic and you. So it's, who knows? Maybe Vic said something that is very important to the case and they need to track that down. But that's I didn't go through everything. I was kind of shocked to just scanning through that I saw that, but I did not look through and see what other members of the media are in there, what other names. I know that they have a search in there for unions, associations, fighter union, fighter association, for the MMAFA, things like that. But you would expect something like that to see perhaps what the UFC's position on those efforts by fighters are. But, we look at that. We made it. We finally made it. We're in the big time. We're named as a search item in the complaint.
Oh, my goodness. I would like to thank the Academy. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's not the only filing. There's one other small, little, simple filing after that. It's a notice of appearance which was filed on March 27th of last week. And it's that the Las Vegas law firm Hayes Wakayama Wan is formally notifying the court that they are entering the case as attorney for the non-party Seneca Holdings, also known as Holo Discovery. Remember, Holo Discovery is the third-party vendor that is supposed to be the custodian to look through the phones and everything. So they are going to have their own attorney now in this case. So that enters a whole new party, a third party, into the case who's I'm not sure why they need an attorney since the court brought him in, but apparently they think they need an attorney, and so they have one representing them.
Wow. All right. So what's next? What's our next big thing that we need to be looking for with UFC antitrust cases?
Well, we got, whatever comes up on the filings. The big thing is supposedly the status conference on April 21st. If there's anybody who wants to go, let me know. I know there's one person out there that might be in attendance, so that'd be great. Is that's the next big thing, because my understanding, I have to go double check what the court's ruling was, but I think there's some determination going to happen on that regarding sanctions and other decisions by the court with regard to the dominance MMA filing. So that might be an important one to attend. If you're on Twitter and you see Alessandro Gelki tweet every once in a while. He reminds everybody to show up on April 21st. And I think he got the same news I got, that that's the date that maybe something on Dominance MMA will be decided. So that we'll have to wait for. That's the next big one. But between now and then, there could be more filings. At some point, we should be getting something about these phones. And there should be some decision, too, at that hearing about the phones, which direction they're going to go with we got phones missing data. There's some stuff to be decided there still.
All right. So let's move on, because there was the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act bill that just flew through the House last week. Are there any bits of new information about that? What happened there? Because I know that you've been in close contact with a few people in politics. So do you have anything for us?
Well, after that bill was passed, shortly thereafter, it was introduced into the Senate, the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. They gave it 2 readings, and then they submitted it to that committee. I believe it's going to be, the text is up. I didn't go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but I think it's identical to that passed the House. The person in charge of that committee is Ted Cruz, who had an interview, I believe, recently with Dana White. I think they kind of tipped their hat there, tipped the hand of what they're up to over there. So it's moving on to the Senate. Oscar De La Hoya said he is going to be doing a hearing in Congress, going to speak in front of Congress, in front of the Senate in a couple weeks. So that gives us a hint that they're planning a hearing already. And, and Oscar also brought up how he's the only one single-handedly fighting this bill. Look at that. Oscar heroically by himself, as he did not show up or call into the California State Athletic Commission or show up in Congress the first time or, do basically anything but clapbacks, but he is heroically standing in the way of the bill by himself. So that's kind of what's going on right now on that front. And as you know, Stephanie, we brought this up before. We have been in some communications with members of Congress, and the members from the House reached out to us to get access to, assistance on putting together some of our articles and transcripts so they could go through them. Same with some members of the Senate have reached out to us to discuss the bill. And just talking to people around Congress, it does seem like a lot of people over there were caught off guard about this bill, especially on the Democratic side, that I don't think a lot of Democrats, members of Congress, know what they voted for. I think they were, they'll tell you they're caught off guard, that this was the word is, if you just look at the track record, they were unaware the bill was even going to be introduced, got introduced, they had an immediate hearing. It shows up again for markup out of nowhere, shows up again on the calendar a week before for vote. So this bill has been pushed very hard to go through Congress. And I think that's a giveaway that it's the TKO that really wants it done, and allies in the GOP are help pushing it through. And that's one of the reasons why it's kind of catching everybody off guard, because there's really no discussion about the bill other than the fact that it's showing up in Congress. The other fact about the bill is, I think it's true, is that there was just no pushback. The fact is they are used to Congress. They're used to being 2 opposing sides. If there's an opposition to a bill, they'll see it, like labor. Anytime a bill is proposed, the unions, they'll send representatives to fight it if it's against their interest. And nothing exists like that in boxing. And, I've told people, I'm like, if you expect boxers to show up to fight this bill, you don't understand boxing. In fact, I don't think this bill is bad for current boxers. It's boxers 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, this could be terrible for. It's just that this is not the nature of the sport, that these guys are not organized, and they're just not the type of people that are going to resist this to begin with. That's the whole reason Congress stepped in and regulated boxing in the first place, because they said the boxers are incapable of kind of defending themselves. Congress has to step in and do it for them. So it was nice little, just getting some touching information from some people. It's a nice information. But the number one problem I think that opponents of this bill are going to run into is just the fact that TKO's got an army of lobbyists showing up. And on the other side, it's just, it's a hodgepodge defense. You got MMAFA on the MMA side calling in and kind of resisting it, but they're not a massive group, and they're an MMA, and they're just not tremendously as influential as like the Teamsters would be, or a major union, and there are no boxers showing up as well. So the number one thing that would probably help halt the bill is if some boxers, maybe not current boxers as much, but even just big name former boxers, which Oscar De La Hoya is, so that would probably help, showed up, made the rounds, called their senators, and voiced opposition. But you're really not getting that. There's a handful that are doing it, but not the numbers that raises attention. And so that's probably explains why this bill is just flying through Congress, because there is no real, there's opposition. I don't want to say people aren't opposed to it. There are people opposed to it, but you're talking about very small numbers with limited resources and limited influence compared to the organizations that they're usually used to that show up when there's lobbying or opposing or support for a bill necessary, and we're not seeing it on this one. The only people showing up in support are the armies of lobbyists and the allies of TKO.
So Oscar De La Hoya could benefit from reaching out to you and maybe getting a little primer going in.
I mean, I don't like to. I wouldn't like to let's say rehearse someone or tutor them on the bill. But if they want to listen to our show, that'd be very smart of them. I think, to listen to our show, listen to the arguments we make. That's why they're there, for the public to this is our case we make, why we do not think this bill is that good. These are the problems we lay out what we think with the bill. So yes, if Oscar was interested, contact us, and I will forward the episodes we've done discussing the bill if he wants to be better informed.
All right. Now, we saw some UFC pay-per-view estimates that were provided by the Wrestling Observer. What information were you able to glean from those?
Well, it was interesting because it came out, caused a lot of excitement on the internet, and no one bothered to confirm. I shouldn't say no one bothered. Some people did, but a lot of people just grabbed the numbers, posted them on social media X, with no credit really to whoever who got the numbers, right? That Wrestling Observer got it. No mention of what the source was for it. Just like, oh, here's numbers, trust us. Now, I believe the numbers are accurate, actually, on the Wrestling Observer. I believe those numbers, they're hinted at, but I think it's pretty strongly likely that they come directly from like ESPN documents, because they line up with like ESPN numbers. And I reached out to a bunch of people to try to confirm it. And, one way you can confirm is if you talk to fighters that are on some of those cards that got pay-per-view points, and you find out what their buys were, what they had on their sheet that says what our total buys was. And you compare it to the numbers that were supplied in the Wrestling Observer, the ESPN numbers. Well, that would confirm it in one way. I mean, the numbers you're going to get from the fighter is going to be higher, but generally it's about 50 to 100,000 based on the size of the event is from foreign pay-per-view buys. So whatever number you're getting that was on the Wrestling Observer, if you compare it to people's buy rates that's reported to them from the UFC, and it's $50,000 to $100,000 less, the Wrestling Observer numbers, that's like, well, that seems pretty accurate. Also, it matches what some other numbers I had from contact that had some ESPN connections. So I would say those numbers, I am very confident those numbers are accurate for ESPN. Now, what does it tell us? A couple things. One is, I know a lot of people looked at it and thought, oh my God, it shows that UFC has no appeal. Pay-per-view's dead. But I kind of have the opposite opinion, because those numbers, from my point of view, were not terrible. They're selling them for $80 a pop. That's excluding the ESPN Plus app subscription you have to pay, which adds, a pay tier to even get to the point where you can order the pay-per-view. But $80 a pop, well, for a 400,000 selling pay-per-view, that's $32 million right there. That's a large amount of money for pay-per-view. That's a large amount they can generate. The only reason these numbers probably look bad for ESPN, is at that time and that year for ESPN, they were paying out $20 million a year for every pay-per-view. And so they would have to, and remember too, ESPN, even though it's the platform providing the pay-per-view, they do not get to keep all the pay-per-view revenue. There is some based on, did you download the app from Apple? There's the digital, if you're ordering it through Roku on ESP Plus, there's a percentage that goes to them. There's the percentage they have to pay to whoever was the digital provider that operated the streaming service. That takes a small percentage. So ESPN was probably keeping close to 90% of the revenue on those pay-per-views, but still not 100%. But even then, it's like, well, that means they still have to sell to cover that $20 million. They have to average, 250 to 300,000 pay-per-views per event. And some of them are like 174 and 62 and then, 320. So they're all over the map. And so you could see why ESPN was like, think this is a little risky, because we are not, if pay-per-views go down, it's proving to be too variable. And that's my understanding too, is that ESPN was very happy in the early years with the deal, especially when Conor was fighting, because they were blowing past what they needed to make their money back. But then later years, the last couple of years in ESPN Plus, they were struggling to hit the minimum what they needed. In fact, we're probably losing money in the last year or two. So those numbers, they tell me, is that pay-per-view technically wasn't dead. Pay-per-view wasn't doing what it did in the glory days, but pay-per-view wasn't dead. There was money to be generated there. The only problem is UFC and their interest of having guaranteed money and what ESPN was paying did not match what was being generated. And so that's the issue. Now, other promotions, especially in boxing, if they can get numbers like that in pay-per-view, they're going to be very successful, because it's bad for them. They don't have a guaranteed deal like the UFC does, where they don't have to worry about the variability of the sales. But you can pay the fighters a lot and make money at those levels. It's just you can't if you're ESPN Plus. They're the only one that was hurt by that deal.
All right, so let's talk about UFC and bankable stars. Now, we're recording this on a Sunday night, but last night they held their UFC Seattle card, and it was a banger. I'm not going to lie. It was a banger. Now, it was led by Israel Adesanya, who we have determined has been like a pretty good star for the UFC, sells some pay-per-views and so on and so forth. They sold out the arena, and they ended up with a $4.2 million gate. But Israel Adesanya unfortunately lost, and it was his fourth straight loss. And this time it was to a lower tier guy, not champion level guy at all. It was like number 8 beat him. Now, how important is star power to them, considering they have not been selling out their cards? As a matter of fact, this is like the first one that they've announced that they've sold out all year.
Well, there's definitely some weakness in their in the ticket sales. They still get large gates. They're probably pushing the price as much as they can, because now they're leaving empty seats. They've maximized it before, and I think they're going to run into more trouble in this, because one of the reasons, we've talked about this, and I don't think it's not like it's special knowledge that only we have, is a lot of our economy is driven by those with higher wealth. That we're making events specifically for them because they're willing to spend more. And we've priced up a lot of live events to a price that the wealthiest 10, 20% can afford. And you see with the UFC, I think what's kind of driven a lot of this is assets have gone up over the last few years. And so people were sitting on a large amount of wealth. And I think with UFC fans too, I think the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, the fact that it was worth a lot gave a lot of, wealth, that they, the value of their assets were high. So they had money they could draw down to buy tickets and do these experiences. Well, it does look, based on what's going on in the Middle East, that oil prices, might hit $200 a barrel. Does not seem as absurd as that sounds up until today. That does no longer seems that absurd. That it's very possible we might hit that kind of price. that we might see a downturn globally, maybe not full recession in the United States. We might be, I mean, ironically, starting the war, we might be the most immune to the impact of it. But there's a good chance that perhaps AI centers and all these microchip processors and stuff that are built in Taiwan will be hurt. And so we won't, our AI centers construction might slow down, and that'll affect the economy. So the U.S. economy, the U.S. assets, especially the big seven that has been inflated by AI construction, data center construction, that might take a hit. So that's people lose their wealth there. I think we've learned that Bitcoin is not the new gold. It's dropped 50% from its peak. It could again drop again. And so a lot of these people that have been buying UFC tickets, I think there'll be a lot of them will be looking at the valuation of their assets going, it has plummeted a lot. I can't spend as much as I did before. And so you might see a weakening on that audience that was willing to spend on UFC events. So I think that's one on the ticket sales. Now, for Israel, I mean, stars don't last forever. I in some ways I view his stardom has waned a while ago. Because I think people realize he's no longer. I mean, there's a reason he's on a fight night and not on a numbered event, right? Mm. In some ways, he's like where Anderson Silva was. He's a name and attraction, but not the star he was before when Anderson was at the end of his career in the UFC and he lost several events. And I think that's where Israel is right now. I don't think that's like they're hurt because of that, because I think it's just the natural progression of his career. We know where he's at. The fact is, though, it does seem, though, that we are again in a low. We've been talking about this for a while. We're in a low on star power. There are stars still being built by the UFC. Alex Pereira has become a star, but
he's pushing 40.
Yeah, again, his star power is not going to last forever, but it's cyclical as star power, but we are definitely in a lull, and it's been in a lull for a while. They generate new stars, but nothing like that string that we had first with Conor. And before that, even, you had Tito and Chuck and Randy. There was a group of guys, and Rampage became big stars. Then it was Brock and Anderson and GSP.
Yeah,
they became massive stars. Then when they started going away, we're like, where's the new stars going to be? Conor and Ronda showed up. Then when they kind of exited, or Conor, without his bender for fucking a decade, we had another group. Israel Adesanya showed up, maybe not as big, but Masvidal was a star for a while. And so there was a number of guys that, John Jones kind of grew into a much bigger star than he had been before. There was a kind of guys that filled the void as much as possible. And then, of course, even Dustin Poirier, I think the pay-per-view numbers show that he was fighting as a challenger for Islam on one of the UFC events, and that sold over 400,000. I think people are wondering why that event did so well. I think it's pretty obvious. Dustin Poirier was on it. He was kind of a star for beating Conor McGregor. So there was other stars appeared, but we haven't had that wave of giant stars for a while now. And, I am waiting for him because it is, it is the natures of it cyclical. They disappear, they come back, they disappear, but we have been in a long lull. And you do one or two. If the mechanism to create stars is somewhat busted in MMA, because one thing that makes star power usually is a long streak of wins, right? Consistent winning in exciting fashion. That makes a star, but also the anticipation of two people meeting makes big fights. And that's the one ingredient I think we're kind of missing in the UFC for a while, because without things like Strikeforce help for that, because it kept people, gave another pond for people to be built up into names on win streaks. WEC to a lesser degree, you got a spot where guys could be built up without being thrown right into the UFC, and then have it, determine who's going to be the best of them right away. Guys could be built up these careers, and then you have that anticipation. When are they going to meet? Who's going to be the best? And in the UFC, we're kind of missing that. The last time we really saw that, I think really saw that to a degree, was when Conor left to fight Mayweather and was gone for a while, and Khabib kind of took the spot. And that created a massive fight between them. We're not getting we're not getting the space necessary to build anticipation for big fights like we used to. There's a little bit of that because I think with Islam and Ilya, because Islam left to welterweight just as Ilya was coming into lightweight. So there's this kind of anticipation for them to meet that's been delayed. And I think that builds up more interest. And if that continues, eventually maybe that'll be a big fight. But we're not getting those type of, big fights like we used in the past. I mean, and they're right there. We got goddamn Ngannou and Aspinall and Jones and Alex Pereira. You think they could just give us a string of massive events at heavyweight, but they refuse to do that. So star power, we're in a lull, but some of it seems to be self-inflicted by the UFC.
Dana White took questions at the post-event presser last night, and he discussed contract negotiations with Jon Jones, specifically regarding the White House card. Now, I know we've talked about this ad nauseum, but it seemed like some new details were revealed there. What do you think has happened now?
Well, it's hard to tell because Dana White kind of contradicts himself. And he brings that old standby, like Jon Jones knew what he did. Well, yeah, but we don't know what he did, and we're the ones asking the questions. So maybe, can you fill us in on what it is that he did? Because maybe Jones doesn't know what he did, because it's a tool. Dana White does that all the time when he has he's trying to deflect from having to answer a question. He knows what he did, and then you have to think in your head, did he kidnap a bunch of kids and murder them? What's going on in here? What's the worst case scenario that instantly comes to my head? Which is a great, smart tactic by Dana White. The other interesting thing, though, that he brought up, his old standby, is that we have to offer these guys 3 fights a year. And Ryan Harkness, wanted a fact checked on this. And unless Jon Jones has a specific contract that's different than any contract I've seen, and I believe when you add up all the contracts we saw from the UFC antitrust, all the contracts I get from various fighters and managers, from other, Eddie Alvarez contract and stuff, I probably have seen over 100 UFC contracts now. I have never seen a contract that guarantees 3 fights a year. Now, in the past, years ago, supposedly there were, back when they were competing with Pride. But in the last 20 years of contracts that I've gone through, I've never seen that. And we've discussed that. If you read the language, the UFC does not require to have to give you 3 fights a year. What it is generally speaking, you have a set number of fights at a set duration that the contract lasts, that they have to offer you those fights. And so if you have 8 fights let's say 6 fights in a 25-month period they got to offer you, well, the contract starts on that first fight. And then they have 25 months for the next 5 fights. Well, that's every 5 months, basically, they have to offer you a fight, except that's also not how it works, because all it depends on is there's a minimum amount of time they have to give you to get ready for a fight. There's in the contract, I don't know the exact time, but if you look in it, you see that they have to give you like a 30-day notice and in a couple of weeks for doing your, all your licensing and paperwork. So it's basically like 6-week gap. So if they wanted, they could offer you a fight, wait 12 months, not give you a fight for a whole year, and then offer you several fights over, 3-4 fights the next year. And then, of course, if you can't make a fight, if you turn one down, if you're injured, they can extend that period for 6 months at a time. And now, so when they say we have to offer you 3 months a year, or we have to pay you.
You mean 3 fights a year?
3 fights a year, or we have to pay you. That's just wrong, because based on the contracts we see, they do not have to offer you 3 fights a year. They have to offer you all your fights within the amount of time that the contract lasts. And they don't have to pay you if they don't offer you that fight in a set amount of time. They have to pay you basically your show money, not your win, not your pay-per-view bonuses, none of that. Your show money for any fights that are left on your contract at the end of the period. And so, with the extensions, the tolling provisions, it's pretty hard to get there where they don't have time to keep offering you fights. So it's very rare. Only in the case of Leslie Smith, I recall, is there a fighter that got paid out at the end of their contract without getting a fight. And so,
Mohamed Bakayev, didn't he have 1 fight left?
Didn't he? I can't remember. No, you're right. I can't remember.
He had 1 fight left, but they just cut him off of a win. So that would mean that they paid him his last fight. But I mean, he's a low tier flyweight, so it probably didn't break the bank.
Did he turn down a fight? when they let him go? I can't remember. Okay.
No, he turned in boring fights, and they just.
They want to get rid of him.
He also had some beef with someone, had something go on, but they cut him off of a win. He did not want to be cut, but they went ahead and did it anyways. Like he begged to come back too, and they kept telling him no. So, but he had I believe 1 or 2 fights left on it. But I'm gonna, for the sake of accuracy, I'll just call it 1. But so that would mean that they paid him because he hadn't turned down a fight, right? Because they cut him like a week after his last win. Like it was barely a week.
That's very possible that they did that. I cannot quite recall that. I'll have to look that up again and double check it. But that's possible. He might be the second person that happened to, which would something to be proud of, that you were cut, released, and at least got paid. We'll have to see if that's true. But it's also possible maybe he violated some rule they had and they used that as an excuse. I'm not sure.
All right. Now, he also said that negotiations were ongoing for Conor McGregor's return, which they're hoping to secure for July, although he did say that they were not even close yet. And I use my air quotes because that was his exact words. They weren't even close yet, but that they were optimistic. So what do you think of that? What's going on there? Because Conor looks like, even though he supposedly found God, he looks like he's back to his drinking ways. He's constantly showing videos where he's got a drink in his hand and he's incoherently, rambling and stuff like that. So what do you think is going on?
Well, you've called it before. He ain't fighting again.
Yep,
it seems likely right. He might not. He might want to try, but there's the other thing to remember too. If he gets nailed on one of these drug tests, they can suspend him again. He's already, what did they report for whereabouts violation? He had an 18-month suspension at one point. Which
I believe so, but he's just got tested again a couple more times over the past week and a half. So they've ramped up his testing. So he's now the most tested athlete this year with 7 tests.
Well, I'm thinking that there's some negotiations going on his contract, and based on with Ronda Rousey, where they were willing to pay Ronda Rousey X amount if the upside was all on pay-per-views, but they were not going to give her that kind of guaranteed. I think.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!